Hi, everyone, and welcome to MIT Press Live, a new virtual event series brought to you by the MIT Press. My name is Hannah Nyren, and I am the Digital Marketing Manager at the MIT Press. And I will be your host for this series. Today, we are speaking with Stefan van der Stiegel, author of Concentration. Hi, Stefan. Great to see you.
Hi, Hannah. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so could you introduce yourself in a couple of sentences? Tell us a little bit about what you do and what you write about.
Sure. So I'm a full professor of cognitive psychology at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. And I am the head of the Attention Lab, in which we research everything sort of related to attention and concentration and visual awareness and visual perception, which is very interested in how the brain deals with all the incoming information around us.
Great. So in a couple of sentences, can you tell us what your book is about?
Yes. So in this book, I give scientific evidence and scientific advice about how to concentrate in these times of distractions. So there are quite some books out there that are really interesting, but they're not so scientific. And this was also the reason for me to write this book, because I would like to inform the public about what we really know about concentration. And of course, I think everyone realizes that concentration is just extremely important in these times of distraction. And I think we can all focus a bit better. And I think if you get some information about how concentration works, this could actually improve your concentration span.
That is probably true. I should probably listen to what you have to say because I'm very bad at concentration. So what inspired your book?
So a couple of years ago, I wrote my first book, and it's called How Attention Works. And that focuses on everything. So where do you focus your attention on? So there was a lot about the visual perception part of attention. And when I wrote the book, I gave a lot of lectures. And I think every Q&A on those lectures were about concentration and focus. So I thought, oh, this is what you guys want to read. Okay, I probably have something to say about this as well. And I started reading all the concentration books and, of course, diving in literature. And then I found out that indeed there's a lack of scientific, popular science books on concentration and focus that is sort of based on solid scientific facts. So that was the reason for me to write the second book. And it's been a great ride. Of course, in the last couple of years, I've seen what the book does in the Netherlands. And I'm very interested to see what it does in the world.
Great. So I'm sure we're all very excited to hear more about concentration. So let's get going. You can go ahead and get started and share your screen.
Well, I would like to start this talk by introducing you to Brian Cullinan. And Brian Cullinan works at a company called PricewaterhouseCoopers. And Brian Cullinan had a very important task. And I think a task with much honor as well. He was responsible for the Oscar prize envelopes. So he had the envelopes and he took it to the ceremony. And then he was then in charge of giving the right envelope to the right person. And Brian was very proud of his job. And he made a lot of photos, pictures, and he put them on Twitter. And he tweeted very frequently. So for instance, this one, hey, I'm heading to the red carpet right now. Only 20 more minutes. And even during the ceremony, he tweeted continuously. So this is him tweeting Best Actress Emma Stone. However, at this particular moment in time, Brian makes a mistake. Brian gives the wrong envelope to the person who hands out the awards. And if you still remember what happened that year, was that indeed the Oscar for Best Movie was actually given to the wrong movie. It was announced that the Oscar was for the movie that Emma Stone was in, La La Land, but it was actually for another movie. And this mistake took minutes and minutes to recover. And I think I think you still remember that the acceptance speech was already ongoing before somebody interrupted the acceptance speech by claiming that an error was made. And this was actually the still from that video that this person was really doubting that whether he made a mistake, yes or no. And a day later, there was an excuse letter from PricewaterhouseCoopers in which they admit they made a mistake. And they, of course, huge apologies there. And unfortunately, Brian is no longer responsible for the envelopes for the Oscars. So why am I explaining this story? Well, I would like to argue that Brian would have not made this mistake if he wasn't tweeting the whole time. I'm almost confident that such a simple task, relatively simple task, as handing out the right envelope to the right person, is massively impaired while you're doing a secondary task. So if he wouldn't be tweeting, this mistake would not have been made. And I think a lot of people in our daily lives, we make these mistakes quite frequently, and we do not perform at our best and optimally simply because we do multiple things at the same time. This is called multitasking, and we'll get back to that later. So we're living in a very interesting time. So there's more information than ever, and I would like to argue that we are perhaps in a sort of attention crisis. That there's so much information out there that people have difficulty focusing on the right information, and we are disturbed frequently. And I really hope during this lecture that you aren't disturbed by incoming emails, incoming messages. So there's a lot of information out there, and we have to select the right information. And concentration is important, right? For important scientific discoveries or making beautiful art or whatever job you do. There's almost no job out there that doesn't require longer periods of concentration. And therefore, it's important to use our concentration optimally. So for instance, during learning, we know that learning is actually a lot better when you're not disturbed. If you learn and you're being disturbed the whole time, actually the retention of that information is a lot less. And still, my university room actually looks at the university library, and I see students typing on their laptops with in between them and the laptop, their mobile phone, which means that they are looking at their mobile phone every time they switch between the book and themselves. It seems like they are checking their phone continuously. And there are many books out there on digital detoxes. So this generally means that there's a need to get rid and to make sense of all the incoming information and to be able to deal with this. And of course, if you still remember the first time you were at Times Square, you might have been amazed by all the information that's out there. But this is a great time perhaps to explain what I mean with attention and what I mean with concentration, because these are two different topics. I even wrote 2 different books about them. So when you're walking on Times Square, there's a lot of visual and auditory information, and our brain cannot process all the information. The brain has to make a selection, and that selection is called attention. So what do you focus your attention on? Your attention is a resource, is a limited resource, and at one particular moment in time, you can only focus your attention at one stream of incoming information, either auditory or visual or audiovisual. Well, concentration is sustaining that attention. So attention is focusing on a particular stream of information, and then concentration is being able to keep your attention on a particular type of information. So this could be incoming information, like my voice. So you're focusing your attention for a longer period of time. It's called concentration or focus. Or it could be an eternal thought. If you think about something, or if you're meditating on perhaps your breathing, this is, if you do that for a longer period of time, this is called concentration. So attention is what do you select from the world around you, and a concentration is keeping that attention sustained for a longer period of time. And still, if you think about attention being a limited resource, we don't spend our attention perhaps optimally. If you just look at people watching their phones the whole time, you realize that what you sample from the world around you might not be optimal. This is an iconic picture made here in Amsterdam, pretty close to where I am. It's kids looking at their phone while the Nachtwacht is right behind them. Well, actually, I know this picture went viral, but we actually did some research on this picture for a radio show, and we found out that these kids were actually making a home assignment about the Nachtwacht. So, of course, this picture went viral, but these kids were actually making a home assignment. But still, the reason why this is such an iconic picture is clear. There is beautiful information around us, and still everyone's pretty much attached to their phones. And even when you're on a holiday, like these guys that are in Venice, they watch their phone and they don't look around. So this is perhaps a good time to explain sort of what's so addictive about this phone, because a lot of the disturbance that we have are due to social media. And I would like to compare our addiction to social media to something that is known as behaviorism. So I think you're aware of the story that the Pavlov's dogs, they were conditioned to respond to Pavlov coming in with the food, and they already starting to produce saliva simply because Pavlov entered without food. So Pavlov became a conditioned stimulus. They have created association between a reward, for instance, food, and his presence. And if we have an incoming message, we're almost like the dogs of Pavlov, that we respond to these messages almost instantly. We know from literature that if you know you have a message, it takes just a couple of minutes because for almost everyone to have checked that message. Knowing that you have a message, so a notification, receives something like a mental itch. And this mental itch results in you checking that message. And it even results in your performance going down if you know you have a message. So we have done experiments in where people were just doing a very complicated task, and we just send them information that they have a message. And that situation results in accuracy dropping. Just knowing that you have a message already results in less performance or performance going down. So this means that if you want to get your attention back, you just should get rid of the vast majority of notifications that you have, because you cannot blame yourself from checking your message if you know you have a message. It's something that you can almost not do. It's almost impossible not to pick up your phone the moment you know you have a message. So make sure that you don't know you have a message. And that's one of the easiest trick you can apply to improve your concentration and your focus. And make sure that if you're focusing, you're not disturbed by incoming information, and then also not that you're not acting on that information. A lot of people actually sleeping with their phones besides their beds, which I think is a bad idea, because if you look at the literature, there actually sleep problems increased in the last couple of years. And this is mainly due to the fact that people still look at social media shortly before they go to sleep. And some people might think, oh, this has to do with the blue light that's from the screen. That's actually not the case. The reason why you have difficulty falling asleep if you just checked social media is due to the fact that you're still mentally active. So these apps are created to keep your attention then for a longer period of time, and to keep your brain active, to keep you aroused. And of course, the difference between a level of arousal and a level of sleep is quite large. So if you're checking your phone, your brain is still active, and this results in you getting to sleep later. So if you have sleep difficulties, I can very much advise you to get rid of your phone and get it out of the room 1 hour before you go to sleep. Of course, you can still watch television before you go to sleep, but make sure that it's not a high mental activity. So watching a rerun of Friends is less mentally demanding than watching something that's very keeping you awake, like a Netflix series that's very engaging. So I cannot say don't watch television or don't read books. Some books are easy, very nice to fall asleep, and some books just keep you awake. So social media, because it's meant to keep you awake for as long as possible, that's not a good idea. And we know that there are more sleep problems than before. But this is problematic, but I would like to give you a solution. So fortunately, we know more than ever how concentration works in the brain. And this is not rocket science. I'm going to tell you just a couple of simple principles that will hopefully allow you to understand what concentration is and also put it to your own benefit. So let's first get rid of fake news. Like there's been some reports out there in very popular books that we now have a concentration span that's shorter than that of a goldfish. And of course, this might speak to everyone. It might be a sign of the times, but it's actually incorrect. There's no scientific evidence out there that our concentration span has decreased over the last couple of years. And second of all, it's extremely weird to put concentration span in one number, because we know that concentration span differs between individuals. Some people are from nature already really good concentrators. Other people have more difficulties and are being distracted by just the smallest information around them. And second of all, and third of all, actually, it very much depends on what you're doing. If you find this talk interesting, you will have no difficulty concentrating for 30 or 45 minutes. However, if you're bored, of course, you could click away. But say you were in a lecture room and I was giving you a lecture about this and you were bored because you don't find this interesting, you will already be losing your concentration after a couple of seconds. So saying that our concentration span is 8 seconds or 9 seconds is nonsense. There's no scientific evidence out there. By the way, this doesn't mean that our concentration span hasn't decreased. We simply don't know. There's no scientific evidence out there. What we do know is that we don't use it optimally. I'm confident about that. And I think this could be improved. So if you want to know what concentration is, I have to inform you about a process in our brain, a function of our brain called working memory. And working memory is responsible for executing difficult tasks, things that don't go automatically. So some motoric actions go automatically. So I can walk without it taxing my working memory. However, every time I talk, every time I listen, every time I do computations, if I think, all these tasks require working memory. So for instance, if you learn how to drive, in the beginning, it requires a lot of your attention and your concentration, and it taxes working memory. However, if you do this task more frequently, after a while, driving can become automatic. However, some things never become automatic. So things that are not related to motor processes, like thinking and talking and listening, everything that requires cognitive resources always taxes your working memory. Second, working memory can only do one thing at a time. So it's impossible to focus on my lecture while thinking about your next holiday. That's not possible. So then you're switching between the tasks. So that means that you're doing one task and then you're switching to a second task. You can't do multiple things at the same time that require working memory. And working memory is difficult to keep a task in working memory. It's fragile. It's very easy to lose a task in working memory. And we know this, right? If you're doing something and someone interrupts you, you almost automatically stop doing what you're doing. If a kid now walks into my room, I will have difficulty continuing because the person coming into the room will automatically capture my attention and will break in and will result in this task be getting out of my working memory. So you can only do one thing at a task. It's required for complicated tasks and it's fragile. And if you know these three things, then you might understand why concentration is so difficult, because you can only do one thing at a time. And just the slightest disturbance or distraction in your environment will result in losing that task from your working memory. So multitasking doesn't exist, right? It means that you're switching between these two tasks, and that might not be a good idea in many situations. For instance, take an example of working memory as a workbench. So it's an analogy, right? So the workbench has all type of apparatus on it. So devices that you use to perform a specific task, tools. So while you're doing a computation, all the tools are on the workbench that are responsible for doing computation. However, if you're then switching to another task, it means that all the tools for doing a calculation have to go off the workbench, and new tools have to be put on the workbench, for instance, to read. This takes time. And every time you switch tasks, it therefore takes time. And we call these switch costs. And secondary, you make more errors when you're switching, because it takes time and mental energy to put tools on the workbench and get them away. And this process results in you making errors because you might end up with the wrong tools on your workbench. And first of all, it makes you tired and it makes you stressed. We know that if people get disturbed the whole day, at the end of the day, when they multitask the whole day, they actually are a lot more stressed, and you see that actually in their blood levels as well. So multitasking, in some situations, it's good. Like, it's not always a bad idea. For instance, I have kids and I sometimes cook. And of course, when I'm cooking, it requires working memory, but I also have to keep track of what my kids are doing. And this means that I'm switching the whole time. I'm cooking, I'm watching my kids, I'm cooking, I'm watching my kids. And this will result in sort of my food being ready later than if I wouldn't have checked them the whole time. And perhaps it's less tasty, and I'm not a good cook, so I wonder whether that's even possible. And I might be more tired, but at least I've checked whether my kids are safe. So yes, sometimes multitasking is a good idea. But if you require a longer period of concentration, for instance, studying or writing a report, it's actually a bad idea to do multiple things, try to do multiple things at the same time, because in the end, it takes longer compared to a situation when you do those tasks serially. So first finish one task before moving on to the next task. And I think, and I've observed people and talked to people, and I think we multitask quite some time, and this is actually not a good idea in many situations. So there's many nonsense about multitasking, that multitasking is always wrong. No, in some situations it's actually a good idea. And of course, you can do multiple things at the same time. I can walk and I can talk at the same time. However, walking doesn't tax my working memory. So you can only not do multiple things at the same time that require working memory. And by the way, women are just as bad at multitasking as men, so we can get that myth out of the way as well. Everyone's bad at multitasking. Of course, some people have less of these switch costs compared to others, but everyone has switch costs. So for no one, it's a good idea to multitask when that's not necessary. And as I've said, the stress system is very active when you've been disturbed the whole time. And I know this, right? I've got a room on my own at university, fortunately. But when I try to focus and I'm being disturbed the whole time by people knocking on my door, after the fourth person, I can feel my stress levels rise because I want to focus. And it's very frustrating to be sort of distracted the whole time, because concentration is so difficult, and it will take perhaps 20, 25 minutes before I get that same level of focus again. In the Netherlands, regulations for driving are extremely weird if you think about this. So for instance, in the Netherlands, it's not allowed to have the phone in your hand while you're driving, but it is allowed to call via Bluetooth in some sort of hand-free system that you don't have the phone in your hand. That is allowed. So you're not allowed to hold your phone, but you are allowed to hold a conversation over the phone. That's weird. The reason for this is that holding a phone, that's not so difficult. It's of course the conversation that you're having that requires working memory. And of course, driving in many situations is automatic, but not always. In some situations, driving requires concentration and focus and attention. And then it becomes a problem. So we know also from the numbers that a lot of accidents in the Netherlands occur because people are driving and they're talking on the phone at the same time. And now you might wonder, so can I not hold a conversation in the car while I'm driving? Yes, you can. The difference between a conversation over the phone and a conversation with a person sitting next to you is the fact that the person sitting next to you can watch the road, and the conversation changes the moment the traffic becomes more complicated. This person sitting next to you watches traffic and realizes that this is a situation where working memory is required from the driver. And this person stops talking, except my mom, but that's a whole different discussion. But this person that's on the phone doesn't hear you. You can hear you, but doesn't see traffic. So that's why doing a conversation by somebody over the phone is more complicated and more taxing on your working memory, simply because it's very sort of awkward to say, hey, by the way, we have to stop talking because traffic becomes difficult, especially when it's a business talk, right? Then it's something that's complicated, something that you have to put your best effort in. Don't drive and talk on the phone at the same time if the call is important. If it's just you saying, hey, I'm 5 minutes later, don't worry about it. But if it's you saying that it's an important meeting, don't do it over the phone while you're driving. These were the old days. Due to the coronavirus, we're no longer so people are sitting in open office spaces. And it's the big question whether open office spaces are actually going to go open in the near future again. But open office spaces are extremely weird if you think about working memory. And I don't understand why we ever worked in open office spaces. Everything you know about concentration, the simple things that I just learned you, then you might already realize that this is a bad idea. And I know that a lot of people are frustrated while they're working in open office spaces. And I know that, of course, it saves money because there's less room that's being used if there are people sitting close to each other and they're flexible offices. But we know that concentration is a huge problem in these open office workspaces. And if you look at the literature, we also know that there are actually people more sick and longer sick that are sitting in an open workspace. A lot of these health problems have to do with mental health problems. People are overloaded in these open workspaces. And not everyone, right? There are, of course, people claiming that they can focus. But if you look at the individual differences, we know that there are a lot of people who cannot focus while people are walking around them, or there's a telephone conversation, even if it's in the back of the room. People cannot focus in the open office spaces in general. And this is problematic because a lot of people work in open office spaces. And for observational studies, we also know that if somebody is disturbed, it might take them 15 to 20 minutes before they go back to the original task. And if I explain that focus is so difficult, then I think we should really pay more attention to somebody in focus. So don't disturb your colleague while this person is working, because it will distract them and it will take a lot of energy and time before they go back to the original task. And if a lot of people are now working from home, and I think a lot of people now realize that working from home, in some sense, not every sense, but some sense, it's actually better than working in an open office space. Of course, everyone might be less creative, and for creativity, we need interaction with people. But if you have to write a report, I think in general, we are better off on our own than in a crowded environment where people are talking the whole time. And I think a lot of people, actually, a lot of companies now realize this. And now we see a transition from open office spaces to concentration room, isolated rooms again. But what then happens that everybody walks in at 8:30 in the morning and runs to these concentration rooms and make sure that they hold the spot the whole time for their own. So it's a jungle. I think open office spaces are a jungle and we should get rid of them. And if we keep them, we should make really clear rules. And as far as I understand, there are very few companies that actually have good rules about how to deal with these open office spaces. And I could talk about open office spaces for hours, because this is, I think, a very big problem. But perhaps the coronavirus results in us not sitting close to each other again. This might be one of the very, very, very few things that might be a little positive about this crisis, that at least for concentration, we understand that working at home is sometimes better than working in a crowded environment with a lot of distractions. And of course, our availability the whole time. We should be online the whole day. And this results in a lot of incoming information. And I think a lot of people consider people that respond to their email extremely quickly as very reliable. But I always wonder, what are these people doing? If you respond to incoming messages the whole time, rapidly, this means that you're not focusing. So what I would like to argue that it's actually better for people to be offline while they're trying to focus. However, this is not very common in companies. And I would really like to advise everyone to talk at your company about how you deal with being available and being responsive to incoming information. So in my lab, I really appreciate that we have communication about this. So people say in the morning that, hey, I'm going to focus the whole day. I'm going to try to focus the whole day. And I might not respond to email. And I know, I understand it now because I've got communication about this. And now I know that they won't respond to this information or to this email that I'm sending them. But don't be available the whole day for incoming information if your job allows this, of course. Not every job is suitable for this type of rule. But I think a lot of us can definitely benefits from a longer period of concentration without being disturbed. But there are so many devices and systems that people use that they need to check in communication in companies. So now we got Zoom, now we got Microsoft Teams where you can leave information. There's Slack, there's email, there's phone. It's just too much. And I think what I can advise everyone to do is talk with their colleagues about rules for communication. So what's the preferable way of communication in our company? And how do we communicate if it's really urgent? Do I call? Do I send a WhatsApp message? What do I do? But then stick to those rules and don't use all the different platforms, because now with video conferencing, we have another set of platforms available to communicate and to send messages. And I think we should very much try to stay offline. And this is also better if you're taking a break, then don't try to focus too much on all the incoming information. Of course, a lot of people use headphones, even if they're in an open office space. And I also get a lot of questions about listening to music while you're working for concentration. And the answer is actually relatively simple. Yes, you can listen to music while you're focusing, especially if it's music that's very familiar to you. Of course, you can use a noise cancellation function, but you can also definitely listen to music. Some people can't. I know that there are people now thinking, I cannot listen to music while I'm working. But for me personally, I cannot work while there's no music on. I have to have music on. It keeps me active and it keeps me awake. But it's music that I'm very familiar with. It's not music that's in Dutch. It's not music that's in English, because then I process the information automatically. But it's music without words. Like it's classical music, it's dance music, it's trance music, longer songs that don't have vocals, linguistic vocals that will that will result in me processing that information automatically. So what I can advise everyone to do is just put on a Spotify list or whatever you platform you use and make a work list and put music in there that's familiar to you and that's perfect for you to work with. And of course, if you then can work, you can automatically load that list and you can start working. Don't share your music with others because this is very personal. And it's some people, of course, don't listen to a new album of your favorite band because then you will listen. But we are able to use this music as some sort of wall around us. And this results in you not being distracted by just people talking around you or phones ringing or whatever. It results in a wall that you create around you, and this will therefore not distract you. But again, some people are not even to listen to music while they're working. And practice, like concentration is like a muscle. And if you haven't concentrated for a while, for a longer period, you will find it more difficult. But I'm confident that if you put on some effort and try to focus longer and put some sort of training scheme, you will get better. And of course, now you would like me to tell how long should that be? And of course, you want me to give you some very practical training scheme that you could use. Unfortunately, I can't. I know there are a lot of methods in the literature where 25 minutes is the perfect time to focus. 25 minutes, I don't know where they get this number from. Like, there's no scientific evidence, and your 25 minutes could be very different than my 25 minutes. And 25 minutes of reading a good book is much more easy than 25 minutes doing a very complicated computation. And of course, if 25 minutes, if you're reading and you're reading well, and then 25 minutes and there's a sort of bell ringing, then you should stop reading? Of course not. If you're in a good focus, then don't stop. So this is something that you have to find out on your own. What's your perfect concentration span? And if you realize that you're losing your concentration, then stop and take a break. But this requires some introspection, and it's unfortunately not something that can be backed up by scientific facts. Psychology is not that easy that I can give a practical training scheme for everyone. And I want to stick to the scientific facts. And one of the final scientific facts I would like to discuss before I'm interested in hearing your questions is about meditation. Because I'm quite skeptical about a lot of things. I'm a scientist, but I have seen some of the literature in the last couple of years about meditation. And I have become quite convinced that meditation is actually a good concentration training. And the reason for this is relatively simple to understand. If you know a little bit about meditation, then you know that especially mindfulness is a task where you have to do one thing at a time and don't pay attention to all the other information, either internally or externally. And that's exactly what concentration is. So while you're meditating, you're actually concentrating. And people who are meditating also know that it's extremely effortful and it's not relaxing because it requires quite some energy. It's a nice thing to do for a lot of people, but it's actually a difficult task to perform. And it requires training. And for some reason, meditation generalizes to other tasks as well. So scientific studies who've looked at the results of meditation have seen that actually concentration span of people who have performed such a training actually improved. And this is one of the only things of the brain that can actually be trained by a game if you consider mindfulness or meditation a game. But it's something that definitely generalizes to other tasks as well. And of course, for some person, it might not be the ideal way to train their concentration. They just want to read a book. It's fine as well. But if you're into this type of stuff, know that the scientific evidence is quite convincing. And if this might be a reason, if this is one of the sort of the final reasons you needed to take that step, you might want to take that step. And of course, take good sleep. This is an open door, I know, but we know that sleeping is extremely important. How long you should sleep depends on the person. I can't give you an exact number. But if these days, if you're or perhaps on a holiday, try to find out your normal sleep day rhythm, sleep awake rhythm, and try to sort of stick to that a bit better because we know it's extremely important for a longer period of concentration. And try to be more offline. Your brain, especially the concentration network in the brain, has to take a rest and has to fuel the battery again. The battery has to be charged. And if you try to focus the whole day, that's not possible. So taking a break at the right moment is actually really important. And with that, I would like to sort of end my monologue and see if there's some interesting questions that I could answer.
Hi. So we've had a lot of questions.
Good.
So I hope you're ready.
I
We've
am.
9 questions so far. And for anyone else who has a question, I've put directions on how to use the Q&A feature in the chat. Please put your questions into the Q&A if you can, because that's where I'm looking. All right. So here's a question. Has there been an increase in attention deficit disorder or just diagnosis of ADD?
Yes, there has been a fast increase in the last couple of years. There are actually many reasons for that. One of the reasons, and I think that's also related to the things we're talking about here, is that concentration has become more difficult. So there's more incoming information. There's more information that needs to be actively ignored. And this results in people who have difficulty focusing, in that these problems, well, this characteristic becomes a problem earlier. So distractibility is sort of distributed throughout the population. And the level where concentration problems become deficits, that might have changed over the years. And of course, it's a very complicated topic, ADHD, and there are many other reasons as well, of course. But it's definitely more difficult to focus. And for people who have difficulty concentrating, this might become problematic now, perhaps more earlier than perhaps 30 or 40 years ago. It's more difficult to focus. There's more incoming information. The world has changed. The brain hasn't changed. It's important to realize that evolution is, of course, not that quick, that we now have a generation with different brains than 50 or 100 years ago, but the world has changed. And the world is more crowded and therefore might be more difficult to deal with if you're not the best concentrator in the world.
Great, thank you for your answer. So we have another question. A lot of corporate jobs write in their job listings looking for multitasking. And most of the job applicants write in their cover letter, I am a good multitasker.
Yeah.
Which, you know, I don't know how many do that, but I'm sure we've all seen it. But you're saying that multitasking is not efficient and effective. What would be your message to these organizations and individuals who are focusing so much on multitasking?
I would like to put in a job advertisement that you're looking for people who are able to focus efficiently and know how to weigh what's important and what's not important. I think that's actually a lot better to put in your job advertisement. And also, if you want to sell yourself, I've read a book about concentration, and I now know how to concentrate better in time. And of course, I said multitasking is not always a bad idea, right? But especially for important things that require a lot of mental effort, it's better not to multitask, and it's better just to focus on one particular task at a time. So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding from multitasking, and this type of job advertisement actually tells to that.
Great. So here's another one, and you might have mentioned this a little bit earlier, but is there any truth to the notion that women multitask better than men?
No, we also have no idea where this neuro myth comes from. It's simply not true. And it's interesting if you read the literature that many of the papers actually analyze this simply because people ask for this. So what they do, and by the way, then you read the methods section, they say, by the way, we also checked between differences between the men and women, and there's none. But it's every time it's checked, there's never any evidence. So it's a story, it's an urban myth, but no evidence whatsoever.
Great. So we have a lot more questions, but fortunately we have plenty of time right now. Can you train yourself to focus in a distracting environment like an ER, like ER docs seem to be able to do?
Yes, so concentration can be trained, first of all, by doing it. And second of all, of course, by getting all the criteria right and make sure that you have some of the simple rules that just apply to actually use them. So a good sleep, mentally sane, physically healthy, watch what you do at what particular moment in time, take breaks. So also make sure that you charge your battery in time. Meditation might be one of them. So the good thing about concentration is that it can definitely be trained. However, it's important to realize that everyone has the maximum concentration span. And the maximum concentration span differs between individuals. Some people can, if they train, can reach very high levels of concentration, while other people can't. But still, I think everyone can do their best to get to their own optimal level.
Great. So here's another question. I heard you saying that for creativity, we have to see other people. Could you
Yes.
please explain this correlation a little bit more?
Yeah, and I have to admit that that's perhaps not based on scientific facts, but a lot of people, a lot of people do work at home and do video conferencing. And a lot of people realize that it's difficult to be creative with a team when you're not physically present in the same room. So video conferencing is great for quick and dirty small talks, but it's complicated because it's very difficult to engage in a meeting during video conferencing. And there are many explanations for this, but a lot of people are actually really tired after a day of video conferencing, more tired perhaps than they are when they're at office. And again, there are many reasons for this. Most important reason is that it's just really bad VR. It's difficult to engage in a room where the other people are not present. And it's more easy if the people are around you to engage. So for creativity and for efficient meetings that require brainstorming, multiple ideas, I think what a lot of people are now realizing that video conferencing is not ideal, and that you need to get people in the same room and also be able to take a walk with a subgroup, have some coffee. I think the best ideas in cooperation, they are initiated while taking a break or during a coffee break or while you're lunching or while you're having drinks in the evening in a bar. So I think that's what I meant with that comment, that working at home in your home is great, but I think for a lot of people, it might not be the most creative place where they come up with new ideas. Again, there might be people much disagreeing with me, but I know there are a lot of people actually agree on this, that their creativity is very much related to the presence of other people.
Great, thank you. So here's another question. Are people who work in an environment where they have to speak a second language always taxing their working memory?
That depends. Speaking always taxes your working memory. Of course, different levels. If you're holding a speech for 500 people, it's perhaps more demanding than when you're doing small talk with your neighbor. But it's definitely the case that when you speak a second language, this requires more mental effort and it taxes your working memory more. So working memory is not on or off. Of course, something that's really complicated taxes your working memory much more than something that's relatively easy. Although they both tax working memory, they do it to a different degree. And talking a second language like I'm doing right now is definitely, this is a lot more difficult for me than when I'm doing this in Dutch. And it's due to the fact that it goes less automatically. The text is working memory more.
Great. So here's another question. Do interruptions and attention recovery cycles accumulate? What are the lasting effects on the brain for this cycle of behavior?
So during a day, when you're being distracted more, it becomes more difficult to get back to your original task. So during the day, when you get more tired and you don't take enough breaks, it definitely accumulates and you will get more distracted and more easily distracted. So simply the threshold for distraction goes down when you're distracting multiple at a time. So this is like a negative cycle that you run into, right? You become tired, then you're easily distracted, then it's more difficult and you become more tired and you become more distracted easily. So this is definitely a cycle that, if possible, should be broken. And then you should try to charge your battery again. If it has lasting effects on the brain, it's difficult to say something about, but definitely we know that people who are distracted more it's one of the contributing factors to people not being able to work for a longer period of times. And I don't want to use the term burnout that easy because it's a very complicated term. And there's much to say about that. But I think we all know what if you are tired and if your brain is tired, what that does to the longer effects of the brain. That's not very positive.
So are you saying that we should take frequent breaks to be more productive, or what would you recommend there?
I would recommend taking more breaks. So myself, I'm a definitely workaholic, but I like to work. But I also have realized that taking a break is part of my work. So when I plan a day, I definitely make sure that there's enough time during the day that I can take a break and I can do nothing. Again, I can talk about doing nothing for hours, but let's hope we do another one of these. In the book, there's a great section. I think that's the most interesting section for me, perhaps, about what happens when you do nothing in the brain. But when doing nothing in the brain is extremely important to, again, charge the battery, but also for creative thinking and also for self-reflection. So I can advise everyone, if they take a break, to do nothing. And it's weird because the brain then mind wanders. It never does nothing, but the brain starts to wander, and it's really important. So if you're waiting for the train or waiting for the bus and doing nothing, don't reach for your phone, but do nothing. This is something that's very beneficial in many, many ways.
All right, so we got a multi-part question, so I'll try to reduce it if I can. So they said, love your enthusiasm and energy for the subject. Very much enjoyed this talk.
Thanks.
just getting those compliments in there.
Yeah, that's good. That's also good for me, for my energy. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll keep you going. All right. So given the COVID-19 crisis right now, where people are seriously stressed and worried about livelihood and health, what strategies do you suggest in terms of being attentive/present?
Yeah, it's a very good question, a very timely question, of course. So first of all, if you're worried and stressed, I know it's easier said than done, but first of all, try not to work. I think if possible, and I know that a lot of companies are actually very good at this at the moment, then don't expect yourself to be an optimal concentrator in this time. So I don't want you to get away with this as another talk in which we should be more effective and more productive during these times of crisis. These are troubling times. So if you're not able to focus or concentrate at one particular moment of the day, stop. Simply don't try, because again, the negative cycle will occur. The good thing about these days, perhaps, is that you can plan your time more yourself independently. So if you're an evening worker and you feel perhaps less stressed during the evenings, you can try to take advantage of this. So now we have more control over our time. Of course, I've got kids running around which I need to homeschool. So during the day, I can definitely not focus, and I don't even try, simply because I don't want to spread my attention too much between different topics. So I try to make clear blocks, and I communicate here very clearly about when I need a period of focus and that I cannot be disturbed, unless, of course, it's something that's very urgent. So communicate to the people. If you're not alone in your house, communicate about when you want to focus. And if you want to focus and you consider yourself in a situation where you're not able to because you're stressed or you're thinking about all these crises or your future that has to do with the crisis, then deal with those things first before trying to focus. We know that people who are stressed out have difficulty concentrating, and of course then you run into a negative cycle again. So if you've never tried meditation, this might be a great period to try it for the first time, or if you've done it previously, to pick it up again and see if you can if you can get it part of your daily routine. So don't be too hard for yourself if it's not working. Yeah, this is a natural situation. Like these are so disturbing times that it's very natural for the brain not to be able to focus. So don't be too hard for yourself is, I think, my most important advice to everyone.
So the last part of that last question was, how good are you at concentration? And
yeah. Bye, I'm leaving.
The next question's about working in a home environment.
Yeah, so of course, understanding how concentration works helps. And it's definitely something that I realized myself. I've also noted during the talk and also in the book that I'm very clear that it's just not everything is going to be very helpful to everyone. I just want everyone to pick up just a couple of good ideas from the book, and then I'm already really, really happy. So definitely for me, I'm not on social media. I'm very clear in communicating when I want to focus. I'm an evening person when I want to focus. During the day when I'm with my kids, I don't even try to focus because I'm saving energy for when they are at bed, and then I can focus. And of course, this is what I do, and it's not saying that everyone should do it. But definitely, I am very much sort of explicit about my own concentration span and aware and conscious about when I want to focus and when I simply just want to go out and be on my bike. And fortunately in the Netherlands, we are allowed to go outside and be on our bikes and just bike for 1 hour. And then I can empty my head, and hopefully after that, I'm able to focus. But if it doesn't work, I'll just move on. But I think a lot of people are in a situation in which they have to juggle multiple things. And I can advise everyone to take a critical look about about what they're doing, of course, if you want to improve your concentration.
Great. So yes, someone else asked, working in a home environment means that there are constant disruptions around me. How do I remove myself from these distractions away from my mental state to ensure that I have the maximum focus levels I need to execute my tasks?
So first of all, buy noise cancellation headphones. I think it's a very good idea in these days if there's a lot of distractions around you. If you want to focus and you realize that you're distracted by the news, try to be offline. Make an appointment with yourself that you now want to try to focus for, and I'm going to say a random number here, 30 minutes. And then, of course, reward yourself once you have succeeded in that. And stop if it's not working. And if 30 minutes is great for you and you feel like you want to continue and reward yourself even more by having a nice snack or listening to some great music. So these are all just simple advices that I think everyone can apply, even in a home environment. And yeah, be clear to everyone that this is my 1 hour or 2 hours, and try not to disturb me. And afterwards, I'm yours again. This is what I tell my kids all the time.
Great. Thanks for keeping up with all the rapid fire questions. So here's another one. We are in the midst of a global pandemic. Surprise. Do you feel that the constant news notifications are a contributing factor to loss of concentration?
Yes, they are. And the brain is, of course, very much looking for new information. The brain is always looking for new information, especially when it's relevant. And I think what we're now having, that there's so much disturbing news and all the information, the news, there's news flashes the whole time. So if you find yourself in a trouble there, make some priorities. So I, for instance, don't check the news during the day. I read my newspaper at 4 o'clock. That's the first time I look at the news, sometimes in between, but I try not to do it. I don't watch television anymore when it's related to the news. I just check the newspaper, really good newspaper, once a day. Because I also realized that in the beginning, I was just checking everything the whole time, all the news services. I do myself at least now notice that this is becoming less, and that I have a news routine, and yeah, that fills my brain enough with information that I don't have to watch the news the whole time. In the first couple of weeks, I think it was very normal. I think it was very disturbing, and everybody just wanted to know as much as possible about this crisis. But now we are in a somewhat later stage in this whole process. I think it's time for some regulation, and I think everyone can sort of find out what's their own regulation. So the same thing with email. Don't check email the whole day. Same thing with news. Don't check news. Try not to check news the whole day.
Great. So here's another one. Any tips on how to help kids concentrate better at home while being homeschooled?
Yeah, so reward is, I think, a technique that always works and works in these situations as well. And try to be extremely clear about when during the day they need to focus. And if the periods that they don't need to focus, don't bother them with homework. So make a very clear schedule during the day about when, what, and where. If you have multiple rooms, it's even better. I don't, but if there's a room that you can create as a classroom, build it and close the door when it's time to go out and play again. So try to look at your location and also look at the timing, and let them have enough breaks as well. And breaks in which they don't watch the iPad, breaks in which they really, if possible, go outside and just do something that doesn't tax their working memory that much. I think, and reward them, make a very clear schedule, and also make clear what the reward is. And of course, we don't want a society in which you only respond on rewards, but especially if something's difficult and when kids are very early, reward can be very simple. Just a simple sticker can already be something that's just fulfilling to them. At least they have a clear goal. They know what they will get if they have succeeded it.
Great, thank you. So we have a few questions around kind of a common theme. And the theme is, what factors make a difference in concentration? One person asked if working at night or day was better. Another person asked if standing or sitting was better. Do those two examples make a difference?
So about day rhythm, there are a lot of individual differences. So on average, we're not so good directly after lunch, simply because of all the intake that we just had. And some people have difficulty at the end of the day simply because they're mentally tired. But there are morning persons and there are evening persons. And I think one thing, if you are not aware of your own rhythm, try to find this out. Try to unravel your own rhythm. So there's no evidence that working at night is better than working at day. I know that there are some techniques that say you want to eat that frog. So as in the early morning, you want to get all the difficult stuff out of the way, because in the early you're still very much active and your brain is still high of energy. I think a lot of people realize that that's not the case, that they're just evening persons. So there are individual differences, but do realize they do exist. So this is definitely something that everyone has. So if possible, try to use those principles. And it's the same thing with standing and sitting. Some people have a lot of mental, physical energy. I'm one of them. I have difficulty sitting still. You might have realized it's me shaking through the room the whole time. Actually, I'm sitting right now. And when I give a talk, normally I'm just walking around the whole room the whole time. So I have a lot of physical energy. So for me, it's difficult to stand still or sit still and focus. So what I really like is that I'm working and I'm moving at the same time. And this is, of course, also what kids with ADHD experience, that for them it's more difficult to sit still and focus than to move and to focus. Because when they're sitting still, it's something that's not natural to them. So what does a kid with ADHD do when you tell them to sit still and listen? They're only focusing their whole attention on sitting still, because that requires working memory for them to sit still. And then, of course, they're no longer listening. So when you have a person that has difficulty sitting still and concentrating, don't ask them to sit still, but move. And a lot of kids actually get a lot of advantage of moving and learning at the same time. And of course, it's difficult in a classroom, I know, but this could also help an individual that's now an adult that is able to move. So I have this thing under my desk. I can show it if you want to. This is beneath my desk. And this is, I can move my feet. And it's nice and I like it. And this, of course, allows me to get rid of some of my physical energy while I'm writing. So this allows me to sit still. But again, some people are perfectly sitting still, and some people just have to move around the whole time.
Great, thank you. So we are at 1:30 exactly. So I don't think we have time for any more questions. But if people were to have more questions, is there somewhere that they could send you questions or find more information?
Yeah, so my website is, it's my last name, it's my full name, .nl. So stevenvanderstichel.nl. I'm not going to spell it because it's extremely difficult. All my scientific work can be found at attentionlab.nl. And of course, I've got these 2 books out there that should be able to be understandable for everyone. Again, this is not rocket science, so everyone should be able to get my points.
Yeah, and for everyone else out there, I did put your website in the chat, but I'm also going to put another link to find your book. You can always read the book to learn more about this subject, of course. And you can find it on the MIT Press website. The link is in the chat. And yeah, well, thank you so much for speaking today, Stefan.
You're welcome. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And thanks for all the questions. Yeah,
there were a lot of questions, and thanks for your rapid fire responses to them. I didn't really take a break because I wanted to get through as many as possible. And thank you to our audience for joining us. It's really valuable to have you here since we can't do live events right now. And I'd like to invite you all to join us next week on Tuesday at the same time at 12:30 for a talk with the authors of #activism. And that also will be really fun. So thanks again. And yeah, you can always tweet at us if you have any other questions about our events. All right, and read Concentration. It's a great book.
Bye-bye. Thanks, guys.
All right, bye.